The first meeting. Zira stared up at the tall shelves in the human laboratory, her large purple eyes blinking in frustration. Being only 3 feet tall made everything in this Earth Research Center a challenge. The other scientists had modified some equipment for her size, but they forgot about the supply shelves. She needed the special testing tubes on the top shelf, but even jumping wouldn't help her reach them. "Need a hand with that?" a deep voice asked from behind her. Zira turned around quickly, her antenna twitching in surprise. A tall human man stood there, smiling down at her. He was at least twice her height, wearing a white lab coat that made him look even bigger. His kind brown eyes and gentle smile made her heart beat a little faster. "Yes, please," she said, pointing up at the tubes. "I can't reach them." "I'm James," he said, easily grabbing the box of tubes. Instead of just handing them to her, he knelt down so they were at the same eye level. "You must be Dr. Zira, the new xenobiologist from Centauri Prime. Everyone's been talking about your arrival." Zira's purple skin darkened slightly. This was how her species blushed. "Yes, that's me. Thank you for the help. Everything here is so." She waved her small hands around. "Big." James laughed, but not in a mean way. "I can imagine. But you know what? I think it's amazing that someone your size has accomplished so much. I read your paper on cross-species genetic compatibility. Brilliant work." Zira's antenna perked up with pride. Most humans just saw her size first, not her work. "You read my paper, but it was only published on my homeworld. I make it a point to read all the important xenobiology research," James said, still kneeling to stay at her height. "Would you like some help setting up your workspace? I could adjust some things to make them more comfortable for you." Over the next few hours, James helped Zira rearrange her laboratory. He built her a platform so she could reach the microscope comfortably. He moved all the important supplies to lower shelves. He even found a chair that was perfect for her size in the storage room. While they worked, they talked about everything. James told her about Earth's different cultures and funny human customs. Zira shared stories about her homeworld and how different everything was there. They laughed when she tried to drink from a human-sized coffee cup. It was almost as big as her head. "How do humans drink so much liquid?" she asked, holding the giant cup with both hands. "Maybe we're just thirsty all the time," James joked, making her laugh again. But then something strange happened. As Zira was showing James her special alien research equipment, she suddenly felt dizzy. The room spun a little, and she had to grab the edge of her new desk. "Are you okay?" James asked, concern filling his voice. He reached out to steady her but stopped, unsure if it was okay to touch her. "Yes, just. The Earth's gravity is different from my home. Sometimes it makes me feel strange," Zira said, but she wasn't sure if that was really the reason. She'd been on Earth for 2 weeks now, and this was the first time she felt like this. "Maybe you should rest," James suggested. "It's been a long day, and adapting to a new planet isn't easy." Zira nodded, but as she gathered her things to leave, she couldn't help noticing how James watched her with worry in his eyes. It made her feel warm inside, knowing he cared. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked as she headed for the door. "I'd love to hear more about your research." "Yes, please," Zira said, her antenna wiggling happily. "And thank you for making me feel welcome here." As she walked back to her quarters, Zira couldn't stop smiling. For the first time since arriving on Earth, she felt like she belonged. But that night, as she tried to sleep, the dizziness came back stronger. Her personal medical scanner showed some unusual readings, but she was too tired to worry about them. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of something that would change both her life and human-alien relations forever. Growing closer, 2 weeks after their first meeting, Zira found herself spending more and more time in the lab with James. Tonight was special. They were testing her new theory about human and alien DNA patterns. But something else was happening too, something neither of them expected. "Look at this, James," Zira called out excitedly. Her tiny purple fingers danced over the holographic display she'd brought from her homeworld. The 3D images floated in the air, showing dancing strands of DNA. Human and Centaurian DNA have similar patterns in these regions. James leaned down close to see better, his shoulder accidentally brushing against her antenna. A small spark of static electricity jumped between them, making them both jump and laugh. "Sorry about that," James said, rubbing his neck sheepishly. "Earth clothes make a lot of static. But wow, these patterns are amazing. I've never seen DNA displayed like this before." "It's our newest technology," Zira explained proudly. But as she reached to adjust the display, her hand passed right through the hologram. That wasn't supposed to happen. Her species could normally interact with their holograms like solid objects. "That's strange," she muttered, trying again. The hologram flickered at her touch. "What's wrong?" James asked, noticing her confused expression. "Our holograms are partially solid to Centaurian touch. It's how we control them." But she tried once more, and again her hand passed through the image. This has never happened before. Suddenly, the room filled with a soft blue glow. Both Zira and James looked up in surprise. The light was coming from Zira's antenna. Is that normal?" James asked, concerned. "No," Zira whispered, touching her glowing antenna carefully. "This only happens during our major life changes. But that's impossible." Before she could explain more, her personal medical scanner started beeping frantically. The small device on her wrist showed readings she'd never seen before. Her body was producing energy patterns similar to both human and Centaurian life forms. "Maybe we should take a break," James suggested, pulling out a tiny chair he'd specially modified for her. "You've been working really hard lately." Zira sat down, grateful for his concern. As she rested, James tried to cheer her up by showing her something he'd been working on, a miniature garden he'd created just for her. "I noticed you missing the plants from your homeworld," he said, revealing a small terrarium filled with earth plants sized perfectly for her. "These are Earth's smallest flowers. I thought maybe they could remind you of home, but in a way that fits your size." Zira's antenna stopped glowing as she examined the tiny flowers with wonder. "James, this is so thoughtful." She reached out to touch a miniature rose, and this time her hand didn't pass through anything. But the flower suddenly grew an inch taller at her touch. They both stared in shock. Did you just make that flower grow?" James asked, amazed. "I don't know," Zira said, backing away from the terrarium. "This is all wrong. My species can't affect Earth life forms like that. We can't." Her voice trailed off as she remembered something her grandmother once told her about ancient legends, stories about Centaurians who developed strange powers when they were about to undergo massive life changes. But those were just stories, weren't they? That night, after James insisted on walking her back to her quarters to make sure she was okay, Zira couldn't sleep. Her antenna kept giving off soft pulses of blue light, and every plant she passed seemed to grow just a little bit faster. In the darkness of her room, she finally admitted to herself that something incredible, and maybe impossible, was happening to her. But what would it mean for her research, for her friendship with James, for everything she thought she knew about human-alien biology? As she finally drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of James's kind eyes and gentle smile. In her dreams, she saw strange visions of stars aligning and DNA strands dancing together, human and alien patterns merging into something entirely new. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more strange happenings, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of the greatest discovery in human-alien history. But for now, Zira slept, her antenna casting gentle blue light across her room, making the small earth plants on her windowsill grow just a little bit taller in the night. The discovery. The Earth lab was quiet at midnight, except for the soft humming of machines and the gentle tapping of Zira's tiny feet as she paced back and forth. She had snuck in after hours because she needed to run tests without anyone watching. The strange changes in her body were getting harder to hide. Today, she had found tiny crystal patterns forming on her purple skin, something that hadn't happened to her species in thousands of years, according to the old stories. Her grandmother used to tell tales of Centaurian women developing crystal markings during times of great creation, but those were just bedtime stories, weren't they? As she walked, small sparkles of light followed her footsteps, and every plant in the lab seemed to lean toward her like she was their son. She had to find out what was happening. Zira placed her hand on the advanced medical scanner she brought from home. The machine hummed to life, its alien symbols glowing in the dark lab. As it began its scan, something extraordinary happened. The machine's light changed from its usual green to a brilliant gold, a color she'd never seen it produce before. "That's not possible," she whispered to herself. The scanner's screen filled with readings, but they made no sense. According to the data, her body was creating an entirely new type of energy field, one that combined both human and Centaurian patterns. And in her belly, suddenly, all the lights in the lab turned on. Zira spun around to find James standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee, one normal-sized and one tiny one he'd specially made for her. "I thought I might find you here," he said softly, walking towards her. "You've been avoiding me for 3 days, and the plants in your office have grown so much they're reaching the ceiling." Before she could respond, the medical scanner let out a loud chime, the kind it made when it detected new life forms. The holographic display erupted with swirling patterns of gold and blue light, forming into a clear image above the machine. James stared at the display, his coffee cups forgotten. "Zira, is that what I think it is?" The hologram showed 2 DNA helixes swirling together, one human, one Centaurian, and between them, a third completely new pattern was forming. But what made both of them gasp was the tiny heartbeat the scanner was detecting, beating in perfect harmony with Zira's own heart. "I'm pregnant," Zira whispered, her antenna glowing brighter than ever. "But it's impossible. Our species can't." She didn't finish her sentence because at that moment, every plant in the lab suddenly burst into bloom, filling the air with floating flower petals. The crystal patterns on her skin began to glow, creating beautiful swirling designs that matched the DNA patterns floating above the scanner. James carefully knelt down beside her, his eyes full of wonder. "Is this why you've been avoiding me? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was scared," Zira admitted, her voice trembling. "This has never happened before in all our species' history. The changes in my body, the plants, the crystals. According to our oldest legends, these signs only appeared in ancient times, when our people were first evolving. My grandmother used to say they were marks of great change, of new life paths being formed." As if responding to her words, the baby's heartbeat grew stronger, its sound filling the lab with a musical pulse. The DNA hologram above them began to dance, showing how the human and Centaurian genes were weaving together to create something entirely new. "Look," James said softly, pointing to where the crystal patterns on her skin were forming shapes that matched the DNA strands. "It's like your body is telling the story of what's happening inside you." Suddenly, Zira's personal communicator buzzed. A message from the Centaurian High Council. They had detected the unusual energy readings from Earth and were sending a scientific team to investigate. In just a few hours, everyone would know about the impossible child growing inside her. As she looked up at James, her antenna glowing with swirling patterns of gold and blue, Zira realized their discovery would change everything. Not just for them, but for both their species. The impossible was happening, and there was no going back. "What do we do now?" she asked, her small hand automatically moving to protect her belly. James gently placed his much larger hand over hers. "We face it together. Whatever happens, whatever this means for both our worlds, we'll figure it out. You and me. And our little miracle." Outside the lab windows, the sun was beginning to rise, its first rays catching the crystal patterns on Zira's skin and sending rainbows dancing across the walls. A new day was dawning, and with it, the beginning of a new chapter in the history of both their species. Complications. The Centaurian scientific team arrived in a ship that looked like a floating crystal, its surface changing colors as it descended through Earth's atmosphere. But Zira barely noticed their dramatic entrance. She was too busy trying to control her new abilities. In the week since discovering her pregnancy, her powers had grown stronger. Now, whenever she felt strong emotions, strange things happened. When she laughed, tiny floating lights danced around her. When she cried, her tears turned into small glowing crystals that hummed with musical tones. And the plants, they didn't just grow anymore. They changed colors to match her moods. "Try to stay calm," James whispered as they waited in the lab's conference room. He had brought her favorite Earth snack, tiny chocolate chips that were the perfect size for her small hands. But before she could take one, the chocolate began to float, surrounded by the same golden energy that now constantly sparkled around her body. "Sorry," Zira mumbled, trying to control her powers. "The baby seems extra active today." As if in response, the crystal patterns on her skin lit up, forming moving images that looked like star maps. The Centaurian doctors had never seen anything like it. According to their oldest records, these patterns were similar to those their ancestors had developed during their species' first evolutionary leap, thousands of years ago. "Fascinating," Dr. Carell, the lead Centaurian scientist, muttered as he scanned her with various devices. "The human DNA isn't just combining with ours. It's awakening ancient genetic patterns we thought were lost forever." Suddenly, all their instruments went crazy. Golden energy burst from Zira's antenna, forming a bubble around her and James. Inside the bubble, time seemed to move differently, slower, more peaceful. Small objects began to float, and tiny fragments of both their DNA became visible in the air, dancing together like cosmic ballet. "The baby is creating its own protective field," one of the human doctors said in amazement. "It's like it's building a perfect environment for itself, combining elements from both species." But then something went wrong. The golden energy turned dark purple, and Zira felt a sharp pain. The crystal patterns on her skin began to crack. "Her body is struggling to handle the energy output," Dr. Carell announced urgently. "The combination of human and Centaurian DNA is creating more power than her small form was designed to contain." James tried to reach for her, but the energy field pushed him back. "There must be something we can do." That's when something incredible happened. The plants in the lab, all the ones that had grown in response to Zira's presence, suddenly released clouds of glowing pollen. The pollen swirled around Zira, drawn into the energy field. As it touched her skin, the crystal patterns began to heal, forming new and stronger patterns. "Of course," Dr. Carell exclaimed. "The plants have been adapting to her energy all this time. They're helping stabilize the baby's power." Zira felt the pain ease as the pollen continued its work. The energy field turned a peaceful blue-gold color, and she could breathe easily again. But now they all understood. This pregnancy wouldn't just be unusual, it would be dangerous. "We need to create a special environment for you," James said, already sketching plans on his tablet. "A room filled with these adaptive plants, with equipment to monitor and help control the energy outputs." The Centaurian scientists agreed, but they added their own suggestion. "We should also bring in crystals from our homeworld," Dr. Carell said. "They might help channel and stabilize the ancient energies being awakened." As they discussed plans, Zira noticed something new. The floating DNA patterns in the energy field had formed a tiny image, a preview of what their baby might look like. It showed a small being with both human and Centaurian features, surrounded by swirling patterns of light and crystal. "Look," she whispered to James, pointing at the image. "Our little impossible miracle." But even as they marveled at the sight, Zira felt another sharp pain. The crystal patterns flashed warning colors, and the energy field flickered. This wouldn't be an easy journey. Their baby was rewriting the laws of biology itself, and Zira's small body would have to somehow handle the strain. As the doctors rushed to stabilize her again, she caught James's worried look. They both knew now that creating new life between their species wasn't just impossible, it was dangerous. But as Zira felt the tiny consciousness inside her reaching out with waves of golden light, she knew it was worth any risk. Outside the lab, crowds had gathered to catch a glimpse of the Centaurian ship. News of the impossible pregnancy had leaked, and now both humans and aliens waited anxiously for updates. Little did they know that inside that lab, evolution itself was being rewritten, one crystal pattern at a time. The truth comes out. The special chamber they built for Zira looked like something from a dream. Bioluminescent plants from both Earth and Centauri Prime covered the walls, their leaves gently pulsing with the same golden light that surrounded her. Centaurian crystals floated in the air, helping to channel and control the incredible energy her body was producing. But today, something new was happening. As Zira lay in her specially designed medical pod, the baby's energy field suddenly created a three-dimensional hologram of its thoughts. Images floated in the air. Memories from both human and Centaurian history. Knowledge somehow passed down through their combined DNA. Incredible, Dr. Carell whispered, watching as ancient Centaurian symbols swirled through the air. The child is accessing genetic memories we thought were lost millennia ago. James hadn't left Zira's side in days, not since her last energy spike had nearly caused a citywide power outage. He watched in amazement as their unborn child showed them visions of early humans making their first tools, followed by ancient Centaurians discovering space travel. "It's like the baby is trying to tell us something," Zira said softly, her antenna glowing with rainbow colors no one had ever seen before, showing us how both our species evolved. Suddenly, all the crystals in the room began to sing, a haunting melody that made everyone's hair stand on end. The hologram changed, showing a new vision: Earth and Centauri Prime orbiting the same ancient star, long before they had drifted to different parts of the galaxy. By the first light, Dr. Carell gasped, using an old Centaurian expression of shock. "Our worlds. They were neighbors once." But before anyone could process this revelation, Zira's body began to glow so brightly that everyone had to shield their eyes. The crystal patterns on her skin started moving, rearranging themselves into complex mathematical formulas, calculations showing exactly how human and Centaurian DNA could combine. The baby isn't just a miracle, one of the human scientists realized, quickly typing notes. It's trying to teach us something. Show us that our species aren't as different as we thought. James reached for Zira's tiny hand, but when they touched, something extraordinary happened. The baby's energy field expanded to include him, and suddenly everyone could see his DNA changing, adapting. Tiny crystal patterns began forming on his skin too. "The father is being affected," Dr. Carell shouted, rushing to scan James. "The baby's energy is altering his genetic structure to better match Zira's." The plants in the room went crazy, growing and blooming at impossible speeds. Their flowers released clouds of shimmering pollen that swirled around the couple, forming protective cocoons of light. Inside their separate energy fields, both Zira and James began to float slightly off their beds. Through their connected energy fields, they could suddenly sense each other's thoughts and feelings. James felt Zira's fear and determination, while she experienced his unwavering love and support. And they both felt something else, their baby's consciousness, reaching out to them with feelings of love and apology. "The baby knows," Zira gasped, understanding flowing through their connection. "It knows the changes are hurting us, but it can't help it. It's trying to prepare us, make us strong enough." "Strong enough for what?" someone asked. The answer came in another burst of visions from the baby. They saw glimpses of a possible future, more human Centaurian children, each one born with amazing abilities. A new species emerging, bridging the gap between worlds. But first, Zira and James would have to survive the changes their child was forcing upon their bodies. The crystal patterns on James's skin spread further, matching Zira's exactly. His eyes began to glow with the same inner light as hers. The baby was literally rewriting their DNA, turning them into living bridges between species. "We need to slow this down," Dr. Carell warned, checking his instruments. "Their bodies can't handle this much change at once." But the baby had other ideas. The room filled with swirling lights as thousands of tiny DNA strands became visible in the air, showing exactly how human and Centaurian genes could dance together in perfect harmony. The knowledge was beautiful, but the power being generated was overwhelming. Zira screamed as pain shot through her small body. The crystal patterns cracked again, but this time James felt the pain too. Their linked energy fields turned dark red with distress. "Hold on," James gasped, fighting through his own pain to reach for her. "We can do this together." As alarms blared and doctors rushed around them, Zira and James clung to each other, their energy fields merging completely. Through their shared consciousness, they could feel their baby's determination. It wasn't just fighting for its own survival anymore. It was fighting to show both their species a new way forward, a path to unity they had never imagined possible. But would their bodies survive the transformation? As the room filled with impossible light and the very air seemed to crackle with energy, that question remained terrifyingly unanswered. Crisis point. The sky above the research facility had turned strange. Golden auroras danced between the stars, and floating crystal gardens bloomed in midair. Inside the medical chamber, Zira and James floated in their merged energy field, their bodies glowing with internal light as their baby continued to transform them. "Their molecular structure is becoming quantum entangled," Dr. Carell announced, watching his instruments with growing concern. "They're existing in multiple states at once." The crystal patterns covering both parents' skin now moved like living things, forming and reforming into complex patterns that told the story of both their species' evolution. But the strain was becoming too much. Zira's tiny body was starting to fade in and out of reality, while James's human form struggled to contain the alien energies rushing through him. Suddenly, their baby sent out a pulse so powerful it shattered every piece of medical equipment in the room. In the silence that followed, a new sound emerged, the combined heartbeats of all three of them, playing like cosmic music. Through their mental link, Zira and James could see what was happening inside her body. Their child wasn't just growing, it was building a cocoon of pure energy, preparing for something unprecedented. But the power needed for this transformation was literally tearing its parents apart. "We're losing them," someone shouted as both Zira and James began to become transparent, their physical forms struggling to remain in normal spacetime. That's when something impossible happened. The plants that had been helping stabilize the pregnancy suddenly uprooted themselves and moved toward the floating couple. They wove themselves into a living nest around Zira and James, their roots extending to connect with the floating Centaurian crystals. Through this organic network, earth plants and alien crystals began working together, creating a sustainable way to channel the incredible energies. The baby's consciousness reached out through this network, touching the minds of everyone in the room. "I'm sorry," the unborn child's thoughts echoed in their heads. "But this is necessary. Look." New visions filled the air, but these weren't memories. They were seeing the quantum realm where human and Centaurian DNA originally came from, the place where all life was connected. Their baby was reaching into this realm, pulling forth ancient patterns that both species had forgotten. "The child is accessing the quantum foundation of life itself," Dr. Carell whispered in awe. "It's rewriting the basic rules of biology." But the process was killing its parents. Zira's small body was now almost completely transparent, and James's human form was breaking down at the molecular level. The crystal patterns on their skin began to crack and fall away like broken glass. That's when a third consciousness joined their mental link, Zira's grandmother, reaching out across space through the quantum connection their baby had created. "Remember the old stories?" Her grandmother's voice echoed in their minds. about how our ancestors survived their first evolution. They didn't fight the change. They surrendered to it completely. Understanding flowed through their connection. Fighting against the transformation was what was killing them. They needed to let go, to trust their child's impossible wisdom. Together, James asked through their link, his form flickering like a faulty hologram. Together, Zira agreed, her tiny hand reaching for his through the swirling energies. The moment they stopped resisting, something extraordinary happened. Their bodies dissolved completely into pure energy, becoming one with the quantum field their baby had accessed. For a timeless moment, they existed everywhere and nowhere. Their consciousness spread across the cosmos. Through this expanded awareness, they could finally understand what their child was trying to achieve. It wasn't just combining their species, it was reaching back to the very beginning of life itself, reminding both humans and centaurians that they had come from the same cosmic source. The plant network and crystal matrix hummed with power as it worked to stabilize this new state of being. Slowly, carefully, it began to pull their energy back into physical form, but they weren't returning exactly as they had been. A gasp went through the room as Zira and James's bodies reformed. They were still themselves, but changed. Zira's small form now glowed with internal starlight, while James's human appearance was adorned with living crystal patterns that would never fade. They had become living bridges between species, just as their child had intended. And in the center of their merged energy field, visible for the first time, floated a tiny being of pure light, their baby, finally ready to show its true form to the world. But as the three of them hung there in their cocoon of light, a new crisis emerged. The quantum connection their child had created was growing, spreading beyond the medical chamber. All across Earth and Centauri Prime, others were beginning to change too. The evolution their baby had triggered wasn't going to stop with just its parents. As alarms blared and chaos erupted outside, Zira and James clung to each other, their transformed bodies humming with power. They had survived their own transformation, but could they help their worlds handle what was coming next? The baby's consciousness touched their minds one more time, showing them a vision of hope. Two worlds changed forever, but changed together. Now they just had to survive long enough to make that vision real. Happy ending. The day their baby was finally born, every plant on Earth bloomed at once. On Centauri Prime, all the crystal mountains began to sing. The quantum connection their child had created had grown into a bridge between worlds, and now everyone could feel the moment approaching. Zira floated in the center of the medical chamber, her small body radiating starlight. James stood beside her, the crystal patterns on his skin pulsing in rhythm with their shared heartbeats. Around them, the living plant network and floating crystals had grown into a beautiful garden that existed half in normal space and half in the quantum realm. "It's time," Zira whispered, her voice creating ripples of light in the air. The baby's energy cocoon began to pulse with rainbow colors, never seen before in either universe. As it opened, time itself seemed to pause. In that frozen moment, their child reached out to touch both parents' minds one last time, sharing a final vision. They saw the true history of both their species, how humans and Centaurians had once been one race, before the ancient stars drifted apart. They saw how their baby's birth would remind both worlds of this forgotten connection, starting a new chapter in the story of life itself. Then the cocoon burst open in a shower of living light crystals, and their baby took its first breath. "Oh," Zira gasped, tears of starlight rolling down her cheeks. "Look at you, little one." Their child was perfect, neither fully human nor fully Centaurian, but something gorgeously new. At first glance, it looked like a tiny human baby, but its skin held the same purple tint as Zira's. Delicate crystal patterns swirled across its skin like living tattoos, and miniature antennae crowned its head, each one tipped with a point of living light. But the most amazing thing was what happened when the baby opened its eyes. Instead of regular eyes, they were like windows into space itself, showing swirling galaxies and dancing stars. When it looked at its parents, both Zira and James could feel its love radiating through their quantum connection. "Hello, little star child," James said softly, reaching out to touch his baby's hand. The moment they connected, every quantum-changed person on both worlds shared their joy. In hospitals across Earth, human mothers found their newborn babies developing gentle crystal patterns. On Centauri Prime, children began to grow a little taller, their bodies adapting to bridge the gap between species. The baby gurgled happily, and tiny floating lights danced around the room. When it laughed for the first time, they all heard the echo of stardust and creation itself in the sound. Dr. Krell's instruments, specially redesigned to handle quantum energies, went wild with readings. The child's DNA, it's not just stable, it's perfect. The combination of human and Centaurian genes has created something entirely new, a template for future evolution. But Zira and James barely heard him. They were lost in their baby's face-filled eyes, watching as it created tiny holographic stars to play with. Through their family bond, they could feel their child's delight at finally being able to see them with physical eyes, to touch them with physical hands. "What should we name the first star child?" James asked, watching as their baby created a miniature aurora borealis above its head. Zira smiled, her antenna glowing with mother's pride. In the old stories, when new life changed everything, they called it Nova, a new star being born. As if approving its name, baby Nova created a tiny supernova of light that transformed the whole room into a field of floating flowers and crystals. Every plant in the garden bowed toward the child, recognizing it as a bridge between Earth and stars. Doctors and scientists rushed around them, taking readings and making notes, but the new family hardly noticed. They were too busy watching as Nova discovered its abilities, creating tiny quantum bubbles to play with, making flowers grow with a touch, and sending waves of joy through their family link. Through their quantum connection, they could feel Nova's contentment. It had done what it set out to do: remind both species of their shared origins and show them a path forward together. Now it could just be what it was: a baby, loved by its parents, ready to grow up in a world that would grow and change along with it. Outside the medical center, crowds of humans and Centaurians gathered together, many showing signs of their own quantum changes. Children from both species played together, their laughter creating tiny sparkles of light in the air. Scientists from both worlds shared notes, already planning for a future where distance between stars meant nothing. As night fell, Nova fell asleep in its special quantum cradle, creating gentle dreams that its parents could share. Tiny stars danced above its head, and when it smiled in its sleep, flowers bloomed in quantum gardens on two worlds. Zira curled up in James's arms, her small form fitting perfectly against his crystal-marked chest. "We did it," she whispered. "We survived the impossible." James kissed her glowing antenna softly. "No, my love, we didn't just survive it. We helped create something beautiful, something that will change everything." Through their quantum link, they felt Nova's sleeping agreement. Their baby had brought not just their family together, but their entire species. And this was just the beginning. As they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in their shared starlight, new quantum bridges formed between Earth and Centauri Prime. Their story had opened a door that could never be closed, a door to a future where love could truly cross any distance, change any pattern, and create new stars from the dust of impossibility.